Welcome to Through the Trauma podcast. My name is Amber Larkins, published photographer, storytelling expert, visual artist, entrepreneur, speaker, and coach. This podcast was born from one question: how do I get inspiring stories of triumph out to the people who need to hear them the most? Come with me, enter my world, where lives are getting changed, heroes are getting developed, and greatness is being achieved. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Through the Trauma podcast. I am Amber Larkins, your host, and today I have with me Miss Catherine Lewis. Catherine, this is a great conversation that we're going to jump into today because she works with youth and she does some amazing things. She's a host of her own podcast called Opportunity Made Podcast, and she's also runs the Leon Foundation of Excellence, which is a program that helps youth heal intergenerational patterns of trauma. So she's going to tell us a little bit more of what all she does and why she got into this line of work and what these organizations do to truly help our youth. So Catherine, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Amber. It's a pleasure. I will start with my own personal story. Those who have run a business are pretty familiar with the concept of creating a solution to your own personal problem, a personal pain point. And for me, that's what it was in creating the Leon Foundation of Excellence. When I was younger, I went through a lot of micro traumas. And for those who aren't familiar with that term, it is smaller traumas that still affect us, but maybe not big ones, such as being in war or being kidnapped and tortured, or, I won't go through the list. We can imagine what it's like. But micro traumas are typical family dysfunction, divorce, which can also be a larger trauma. It depends on what that experience is like. But those traumas add up and they affect us quite a bit. And through my experience, and we can dive deeper into the specifics, but through that experience, I really wanted to help other high school students who were going through similar traumas. And there wasn't a program to do so. I didn't feel like there was a sense of community, and I wanted to create that. And so I formed the nonprofit from that place.
That's incredible. And I think a lot of people will start things because it comes from a rooted desire that they see they needed, and then they can't find the resources, so they create it. So kudos for that. That's commendable, to say the least. And I love what you're doing with youth, because I think sometimes it's easy for society and culture to somewhat forget about the youth. Like we still, and I'm including like we, because, it's very easy to get caught up in this, but just feeling like they're kids, they're in this transition period from childhood to adult, but they're still just kids. And it's easy to kind of to think that on the surface. But I mean, when anyone really sits down and thinks about it, because of that transition, it is a major thing in life, transitioning from childhood to adulthood. And those teen years are vital. So can you, do you see this like in the foundation that you work in? Do you kind of see this struggle, and like what percentage of kids do you see this in?
Yeah, I think everyone struggles with it in different ways. And we have often worked with students who are on probation. And so you see quite a bit of struggle there. Their families are going through a lot of the extreme things in life. Being in jail, dealing with addictions, drug addictions, alcohol addictions, different things like that. But I think everybody struggles in one way or another. We can all think back to being in middle school and those dreaded years. It's just a hard time in life. You're going through a lot of things within your own self, trying to figure out the world, trying to figure out your identity, where you belong, transitions in family. So it's difficult. And one of the things that we really encourage, though, is how do you start that inward journey? Because that's a time in life when you're very focused on the external. You're focused on your friends. You're focused on work. You're focused on maybe boyfriends or girlfriends, things like that, fitting in and finding your place. there's not as much of a focus on that inward journey. Who am I? And really reflecting on it. I think we ask that question a lot, but really sitting down and reflecting on it separate from our parents' approval, separate from our friends' approval. That's a hard thing to do. But we want them to start that inner journey and think about the different things that they've gone through, how that's shaped what their beliefs about the world. Are those beliefs actually true? For me, one thing that influenced me is I was running from a bear, so to speak. It's that image of there's a bear coming after you and you're running away, and that bear may be your dad, it might be your mom, it might be, another guardian or some kind of threat that we're running from. Maybe it's just a general fear that we have, but I think a lot of us are running from a bear. And so you have to stop and say, is this bear actually even chasing me? If I look around this current environment, is it actually a real threat? Or did I form certain beliefs that perpetuate that escapism and perpetuate running, but it's not actually impacting me anymore? Maybe it happened a long time ago. Maybe that person's no longer in my life. And it's asking those kinds of questions that we really encourage, because wherever you're coming from, whatever those beliefs are, is what's going to determine who you date, who you marry, what you study in school, if you go to school, what career you choose. Because a lot of times we move forward in order to run from something rather than being very responsive and proactive about the future choices that we're making.
And that's so true. And I think, from doing this podcast, I can honestly say that I'm in my 40s, and people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, even 60s still struggle with figuring themselves out, figuring out the trauma that, I think it does stack as we get older because we go through different things. But it's not to discount that kids go through these things, and it's hard to put your finger on what's the root issues of these things. So I think that the organization that you have is it's amazing that it helps just people get clarity on these things, especially youth. And on top of that, you're dealing with kids who, like you said, they already have these struggles, these inner struggles, like every single person. But then when you add on top of that these struggles of, like, drug addiction in the family, or alcoholism, or incarceration, or all of these different factors, that's like exponentially catapulting the effects of trauma. And I've never really thought of it like this, but I can see how it would affect different things that they do. So, how long have you guys been doing this here?
Yeah. I've been running the organization for the last 8 years. I formed it my senior year in college. And we've just been doing some amazing work ever since then. We work locally, and then during the pandemic, we're working with students all across the country and in 4 different countries around the world. So that has been an incredible honor. We have an online course that then supports people. They can take it wherever they can be, any age. It's geared towards youth, but really anyone can go through it, where they're learning about that inner world, and then how to build trust with yourself, have good relationships. And we transfer that to your interpersonal relationships, and how to resolve conflict and have nonviolent communication. And we'll go through like a genogram, which is where you map out different patterns in your family, patterns of divorce, patterns of addiction, those kinds of things, so you can understand your environment and the behavioral patterns you're surrounded by and you're being influenced by. So it's a beautiful process. And we've had just some incredible testimonies. We had one student who started the program, and we asked them, what do you see for your future? And they were 16, and they said, I don't see myself living beyond 18, because of the environment that they were growing up in. And so they had a 2-year lifespan mentally. And then they got to the end of the program, and we asked the same question, and they were excited for college and excited for their future. And, let's say they live another 40, 60 years. We just added that back onto their their life just by shifting their mindset. And that matters. Of course, physically, they might have lived a long life, but you need people to be able to have hope and see a runway before them, because that's going to change the decisions that they're making on a daily basis when they know they have a future.
I'm not sure your age, but like in my generation, looking back, like recently there has been this shift in culture that obviously we've been exponentially getting worse in our culture, like the music and the media and all these different things. But how have you seen this shift in culture affect the youth and affect how they deal with it? Has there been a change or not so much a change that you've seen?
I think there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of confusion as to what is true, what is right, what is wrong, who are they, what do they like, what do they not like. And that's some of that is just natural, as we were talking about before during that time period. But there's a lot of extra confusion that is just being instigated and propagated in the way that our culture and society is changing. And when we are confused, when we're unsure, when we can't find a way out and we can't find answers, especially when it comes to harder, more emotional things, that's when you start having things like suicidal ideation. I can't figure a way out of this. I don't know. I don't have clarity. That's a lack of clarity. And when you have that lack of clarity, you are very clear about one answer that will work. Let me just get rid of myself, right? That'll take care of everything. And so we've seen suicidal rates go up. Or even if people aren't actually committing it, but just having ideation, that has gone up quite a bit. And that's super sad. That's incredibly sad. And so people need more structure. They need more guidance. They need to know what is right, what is wrong. How do I navigate my way through it? Is this okay? And a lot of that comes from being compared to each other as well. I know that social media gets a lot of blame, um, but it's true. You just inherently in the nature of the product, you get exposed to a lot of different people, a lot of different opinions, a lot of different thoughts, a lot of different ways of going through life, more than we've ever had before in history, just because of the reach of the product. And that creates a lot of confusion when you're in a very malleable time in life and unsure of which way to actually go and how you're going to make it.
Do you see more issues in children that are raised in these kind of outward situations? Outward in the sense of like, if my parents are incarcerated, then everyone knows this. Or if my parents are on drugs, it's kind of like a known, not always known, but sometimes known. Um, versus like kids that have gone through, maybe they've been raised in a very successful home, and from the outside it looks like perfect, but on the inside it's far from perfect. Is there differences in these two categories, or are they kind of the same and you really don't know till you kind of dig behind into the root of what's really going on?
Well, there's different answers for that. Um, I think everyone experiences trauma, and when it's obvious, let's say based on the place that you live and the clothes that you wear, it's clear that your family doesn't have money. That can go either way. Sometimes it's just, it is what it is, and this doesn't bother me. For other people, it's very much an environment of hopelessness. This is what it is, and there's no way of getting out of it. So let me just embrace it. And sometimes the embracing of it looks like the next generation, those youth, perpetuating the same behaviors, right? So then maybe they're incarcerated as well. Maybe they're on probation. We see that a lot. There's a lot of students who are on probation, and they also have family members who are as well. And so there's a trend there. When you have outwardly the quote unquote perfect family, and we all know that it's not, because everyone has dysfunction, that can be hard because you have to keep up appearances. And so I don't actually get to feel my feelings. I don't actually get to have real relationships because I can't break down and tell my friends, look, my parents had a fight last night and it really affected me. Or we actually don't have a lot of money because all the money we do have is caught up in assets and we're actually struggling, but I can't tell you because then I'm going to lose your friendship because you're friends with me because I have a nice house or a nice boat or whatever it is. You know, the biggest thing that we try and encourage is honest and transparent conversations. We talk a lot about how do you relate to each other and how do you have good communication because that matters and it's pretty absent nowadays. It's a lot of appearances in the way that we're talking to each other and what we're showing online, and nobody gets to have real relationships through that. You can't be vulnerable and break down and say, this is what I'm struggling with. And it's through the struggle and the vulnerability that we grow with each other, we bond with each other, we have deeper connections. And so, yeah, there's a lot of feelings of isolation. And when kids feel isolated, they feel like there's no hope. Again, that goes back to what we were saying before. That's when they'll fall into poor behavior patterns or experience suicidal ideation.
You said that you kind of have your own story that has brought you to this, and I know you started this in college, but do you mind to share kind of what happened with you that you have such a passion for doing this now?
Yeah, absolutely. My childhood consisted of just general dysfunction. It wasn't anything crazy per se from, an adult perspective. But as a child, here are some of the things that I experienced. My father is and was, he's no longer serving, but was a Marine. And he went through that process in the military and saw how it worked very well to get people to be compliant and do what they need to do. It serves a purpose there. But there was an error made in him saying, okay, well, maybe this will work well in terms of disciplining children. And so there was a lot of drill instructor yelling kind of behavior. And for me as a young girl, that just was terrifying. And you add that in with a lot of workaholism and stress from there and not managing that well. And so then he comes home and all of a sudden is mad and you were just playing. You don't know why. And so you start to learn that life is really unpredictable. And when you could be happy and then all of a sudden everything is chaotic and you're being yelled at and you don't know why, right? So there was a lot of those micro traumas, as I called them before. And I think I had some sense of emotional intelligence as well, where I could see, hey, this isn't working. And when you're behaving this way, it leads to that. And if you behaved this other way, then it would lead to this other thing that's healthier. And so we would have conversations and I'd say, hey, can you please do this differently? Like that hurt me. I didn't appreciate that. I would prefer this other thing. And of course, like it hurt him to hear that and we would cry and we would process it, but then the behavior wouldn't change. And we all know like it is a challenge to change behavior, but you've got to be invested and you've got to want it and be courageous and just doing it despite what you're afraid of. Because we form behavioral patterns, right? We're used to doing something a certain way. We know that it works and we're afraid of changing. But when I was 13, my parents divorced and his behavior still wasn't changing in the way that I would have liked. And I know that may sound a bit arrogant. And I think in some ways it was. In some ways I was wrong and I didn't fully understand what he was going through. But in some ways I was right. And yeah, he could have done better. And didn't make that choice, chose to escape into work and other avenues. And so I asked him to not be in contact with me. I asked for our relationship to end, and he was very, very respectful in giving me that space. And so we didn't have a relationship for 13 years. And in that process, ironically, I dove pretty strong into being a workaholic myself and getting lost in that whole realm of seeking significance and trying to be seen through my accomplishments and through my work because I didn't feel like I was receiving that from my dad. And that's where I really wanted it, but I looked for it in other ways. And through that process, went deep into self-help books, therapy, working through my different traumas, and it helped quite a bit. We were able to restore our relationship and get back together 13 years later. And it was from that process that I was inspired to create this organization. But I will say that there is something that really put the icing on the cake, so to speak, that came just in this past year that has absolutely changed everything. And for me, that was having a relationship with Jesus Christ and becoming a Christian. That has changed everything and allowed me to heal on a whole new level, allowed us to have a relationship on a whole new level. But really, to sum it up, my trauma came from my childhood and not having that relationship with my dad. And I wanted people to start at an earlier age going through that inner journey and healing. So that way they're not becoming 30, 40, 50-year-olds who are parenting children, and we're just repeating this cycle. That's why we focus so much on healing intergenerational patterns of trauma, because I know that his dad was a workaholic and his father before him was a workaholic. Like, this is a generational pattern that we have and have taught each other how to do, so that way we can escape and cope with the things that we're feeling. And then subsequently, all of our children feel neglected. My dad felt neglected by his father, so on and so forth. And so we have to break that cycle. And that requires us being super aware of what cycles are we perpetuating? Why are we doing this? What are we running from? How do we handle it differently? And even if we don't know because we haven't seen another example, we need to go ask those questions. We need to do that research. We need to pray about it. So that is where it comes from. And there's a snippet of my story.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know first you call these micro traumas, and I've never heard that term used, but I think it's so vital. I don't know if you coined that term, but I had people when I first started this podcast that would reach out to me and they're like, they're obviously had undergone trauma, but they were like, my trauma is not, it's not really trauma, or it's not, they wouldn't really call it that, or they would reach out and they'd say, I have a story, but it's not like PTSD, or, and I'm just like, it doesn't have to be those things. Trauma is how it affects us. Like, whatever, you could have a situation that happened to the both of us, you and I both, and it affect me greatly and not affect you at all. And you hit on this earlier, you touched on this, but that it goes back to this whole thing of trauma is what affects us negatively, and then it's what we have to work through and heal through. And unfortunately, the thing with trauma is it's one of these things that if it gets buried and put in the back of our minds, that every time we're triggered, we kind of revisit those feelings, revisit that pain or that turmoil or whatever, and it kind of rehashes again and again. And this is why healing is like vital to someone who has undergone trauma. And to dismiss trauma and say, well, yeah, my dad, whatever, he, talked to me roughly when I was a kid, but that was traumatic, then it's something that still has to be worked on and worked through. And childhood trauma is one of these things that, in my opinion, it's hard when it comes in the form of like parental relationships, and even in marital relationships, because you're with this person all the time. So usually if there's something traumatic happening, it's happening again and again and again. So you're not only experiencing that trauma once, but you're experiencing a series of that problem over and over and over. And you said that, you have to be able to have an awareness, and you have to be able to communicate and share, hey, this thing hurt me. And that person has to want to change. And those are several components that it's like, if you don't have those things, then you have to learn how to navigate through those. So I'm curious with what you do in your organization. Does what do you tell a child or a teenager that would come to you and they're experiencing these type of what you would call micro traumas, or even even more, macro trauma, like huge traumas, right? Um, what would you tell them if they can't get out of that situation, like they're with their parents and that's a situation they cannot avoid? How do you work through something like that?
One thing I want to go back to is our response to trauma. And this will also answer the question, but sometimes the event isn't as traumatic as our response to the event. So if you've ever seen a child who falls down and scrapes their knee, before they cry, they'll look at their parent and they want to know if that was a bad thing, if they're in danger. And if the parent goes over and goes, "Oh my goodness, are you okay? They start bawling. But if you just look at them and say, "Okay, stand up," then they'll brush it off and they'll be laughing instantly and playing again. So we also have to assess our own responses. If I am taking something that wasn't meant to be mean, and I am getting all upset about it and I'm crying, that's going to elicit a visceral traumatic response within my body, right? So that's another thing for us to just be aware of, that it's not to dismiss the actual trauma that we did experience, but we just need to go through and say, well, how much of that was my response to it and how much of it was the thing itself? And how much of it was my interpretation of what happened? Because sometimes, a lot of the times, we misinterpret what's actually going on. So I just want to throw that out there. But in terms of working with students who can't get away from this traumatic situation, it depends. If it really is extreme and we need to bring in, social services or call the police, like, then that needs to happen, right? If someone's actually in a lot of danger physically, then that needs to happen. Unfortunately, if it is psychological or emotional trauma, um, there's not as much social resources for that. Yes, counseling and therapy, that matters. Not everybody has access to that. So the biggest thing that we work on, again, is communication and their own internal world. Are they able to forgive? Are they able to talk things out? Do they have the skills that they need in order to go find community, find people that they can talk to, find mentors who can give them additional skills? So we try and work with that as much as possible because we understand um, not everything is a situation where you need to leave. Like, my situation wasn't one where services could come in and help. Luckily, it wasn't that bad. Was it still impactful for me? Absolutely. Did it still hurt a lot? Absolutely. So now what can we learn that's going to help within this situation? How can I decompress? How can I have community? What can I grant to this other person? The biggest thing to understand is hurt people hurt people. And so how can we offer forgiveness and grace and undeserved love to this other person? And sometimes people think that's a lot to ask of a child to do to the adult because the adult's supposed to parent, but there's a lot of adults who don't know how to be parents and haven't matured themselves. And so if we can at least help the student to learn how to do those things, then that's how we start breaking those cycles.
Do you have any experience with narcissistic parents?
Um, In terms of answering that, someone who's specifically diagnosed to be narcissistic, I can't say. But do I understand that behavior and what that looks like? And could I personally give an opinion? Yes, I would say so. That was a bit of what I experienced myself. There's been a lot of growth since then, but basically, you have extreme narcissism where it really is they are completely self-absorbed, and then there's degrees. Sometimes people are just selfish. Most of us are selfish. Most of us are interested in what is best for us and our needs, and we're not as sacrificial as we should be. And what do I mean by should be? Well, in the last year, I've learned a lot about what does it mean to sacrifice and what does it mean to truly love someone else. And you've got to put their needs before your own. You have to humble yourself and you have to say, yeah, I don't want to do this, but I love you so much, I'm going to. And to do that again and again and again in the daily grind of life is what it means to be focused on another person and to love. And a lot of us aren't. We get home from work, I'm tired, let me put you in front of the TV, and I just need a break, right? Yeah, sometimes that's okay, but sometimes it's way too much. And that is a form of being very focused on the self.
Yeah. The reason I ask, I think sometimes with the narcissism, it is something that happens inside of homes, I think in a lot of homes, because I think a lot of narcissistic behavior, especially for someone who is would be deemed as narcissistic, um, they kind of wear a mask on the outside. So no one
Mhm.
knows what's really happening on the inside. No one knows what type of things the child's dealing with or what type of things like it's really hard to put your finger on. Um, and it's funny because just recently, this past week or 2 weeks, it's been something that I just like God will put these certain things on my heart, and then I just start studying them a lot. And it's one of these things where I started really looking into this spirit of narcissism and how I've seen it throughout the course of my life, like coming even in churches I've been involved in, and different relationships. But I I really feel like this is one of the hardest thing to really navigate because it's really hard to put your finger on. And this is why I think that when you think of it almost like a, and I don't want to get too off cuff here, but like when you think of it almost as like it truly is a spirit, it's like one of the spirits that I'm sure Satan uses the most because it's very pretty and put together on the outside, but on the inside, it causes so much turmoil and stress and strife in the lives of those being affected or being attacked by it. So I was curious if you had thoughts about that or if you've seen this in kids, because even in the kids, I would think, and I don't work with youth, but even in youth, I would think it would be hard a little bit to put your finger on exactly the root problem for that particular type of experience.
I think that goes back to what we were talking about with extremes. If you are dealing with someone who blatantly just outright hits you, let's say, and I want to be very sensitive in talking about this because I know there are people who are listening who have experienced this, and by no means am I demeaning any kind of traumatic experience. But if you know you're going to be hit, all right, you can brace yourself for that. But when in one moment you're receiving this kind of treatment and then all of a sudden someone switches to something else, or outwardly they're so kind and so generous, and then all of a sudden at home they're just mean and they're selfish and could care less about you, that's a kind of hurt that really, I don't know, it gets deep because it's manipulative. You don't understand why. It's hard to brace yourself for it because you don't know when it's happening, and it affects your mental state, your emotional state. And it's hard to guard yourself against because it can just happen whenever in a myriad of ways. And so to go back to a spirit of narcissism, I think that the enemy does use things that are less obvious, right? Um, and those are the things to be more weary of. That's where we can be more easily deceived. The pride, the selfishness, those are things that don't look like they cause a lot of damage and therefore do a ton of damage. But it's very slow. It's just like slowly turning up the heat in that boiling pot of water, and all of a sudden the frog is cooked, right? You don't see it coming. Versus if we just turned it up, that's that like, all right, I know I'm going to get hit. I know I'm going to get beat. Like I can prepare myself for that. And again, I'm not promoting that whatsoever, but it's just different. And so we have to recognize that it can be a little bit more deceptive and it can seep in under our skin. And those are definitely things, if someone is a person of faith, to pray against, because I have dealt with those kinds of things, and you can be delivered from them, and there is freedom on the other side of that. And so sometimes it's not even the person themselves. Sometimes there is this additional influence, and that's not to excuse them, but it's just for you to know what you're dealing with. And that's something to pray against.
It's perfect advice. I was just curious your thoughts about that. Um, so you brought up something a little earlier about how the relationship that you have with Christ has now influenced the relationship that you have with your father. I want to say, first of all, there is a level of healing that takes place when you can, one, read scripture, want to like start to have that interpersonal relationship with the Lord. I feel like it opens your eyes to certain things, that you see things in a new light. But there's a level of empathy that comes along where you're like, I see that you're in a whole nother person with a whole nother set of struggles, and I can empathize as on that level of empathy. Um, I know, like, in certain things that I've gone through with in my own personal life, and then with people I've dealt with that has I felt did me wrong. God brought this scripture to my mind. We fight not against flesh and blood, but against rulers and principalities. And this verse has like resonated in my mind. So when people do wrong towards me, or I feel that I've been done wrong, um, I resort back to that. Like, I'm not fighting this person. Like, I'm fighting the things that they have also dealt with. Like, I have my own triggers that affect me in a certain way, and maybe make me act unreasonable at times because I'm reacting instead of acting on a calm, thoughtful approach. Like, I'm just jumping right to it. Like, that offended me, kind of a thing. And I think when we can look at other people and see that we're all human, we all have that, it does bring about a level of empathy. There, when you work with the youth, you talk with them about empathy and seeing perspectives through the eyes of those that have harmed them, or they deemed has harmed them or hurt them in some way.
So there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, I
Sorry.
will say, no, it's great. I just have a lot of thoughts about it. First of all, I will say there's a book by John Bevere. It's called The Bait of Satan, and it talks about when we take offense, that is a great doorway for the enemy to move in and start messing with us, right? So it is so important to have empathy and to not take things so personally, because when we do, that's when a lot of the chaos, the inner turmoil is created. Secondly, I'll say with the students, we do talk about empathy quite a bit and how to bridge the divide. We have modules specifically on this, how to understand different perspectives, how to inquire about people's backgrounds. Why do they do what they do? Oh, wow. Like, I've never talked to mom and dad about how they were abused when they were kids. They never shared that with me. And, there's a lot of folks who don't share their stories with their own children because it's hard for them to relive it. But when you understand those things, you can have a lot more empathy, and it matters a lot. I will also say, in terms of my own journey, I never liked reading the Bible. It didn't make any sense. It just did not make any sense. I couldn't understand it, and there were so many things in there that just seemed weird that they would be associated with God. And then once you can come to this place of humbling yourself and you realize, wow, I cannot do life on my own, that God is behind me and I need him, that I have made a mess of things, that my pride and my selfishness has caused a lot of turmoil, and I need the Holy Spirit within me. I need Jesus in order to get through this. And you can humble yourself in that way. It is amazing. Like, it's hard to believe because it just sounds so simple, but you do that and everything changes, and you can go back and you can read scripture and it's like, whoa, you see everything with new eyes. It's totally different, and your heart changes, and you have a love for what God loves and a hate for what he hates, in terms of like, I don't like those behaviors, but I recognize that it's a behavior. It's not the person. And I have so much love for the person. And now I want to come alongside them and I want to be on their team. And it's like, let's fight this behavior together. Let's see if it's even influenced by something that's more in the spiritual realm. Let's see if we can pray against it. You're not the enemy. There's a different enemy, and we're on the same team now working against that enemy. So it changes everything.
That's beautiful. I mean, you have such a beautiful heart, and I can hear that just from talking to you. But that's so true. And you took what I said and just kind of like expanded on it, which I feel like has just given me a whole new perspective as well. So I think that's wonderful, and that's what fellowship is. That's what getting together with other people is, that inspire and encourage whatever it is that you're trying to grow in. And you know, you said this about scripture. I truly believe, like, you've heard it said that scripture is like a living, breathing word of God. Like, it truly is, because I've been a Christian for, geez, almost 20 years. I've been walking with the Lord. I'm not been perfect by any means, but I could pick up scripture today and read it, and it might say something different to me that pertains to whatever's happening in my life that I've never seen before. And I've read scripture for the last 20 years. So it's just, it truly is like a living, breathing word of God. And it does have that effect. And it's hard to explain that to someone who doesn't have a relationship with God, or doesn't have that relationship where they read scripture, read the Bible. So with your dad now, you guys have a flourishing relationship, or where is that at today?
We have the best relationship ever. Like, I have the dad that I wanted, and it's not because he's changed in large ways, right? Like, he still has his things. He's still working through things. I still have my things that I'm working through. But we know how to relate to each other. We know how to understand each other. I know his heart, and I know that he loves me so deeply. And while that may not come across, because, sometimes I have to do a lot of the outreach. I have to go to him and say, call him and say, "Hey dad," like, but he is there and he always loves me. And so it's not going to be the fairy tale father relationship that I wanted as a kid that then caused a lot of trauma because it wasn't that way. But I have a lot more understanding and empathy and compassion for the things that he's still battling with, his insecurities, his habits, the challenge of changing. And so I can accept him as he is, and I can accept the love that he gives me in the way that he gives it. And I still know that it's valuable and it's meaningful. And so we have this beautiful relationship, because he wasn't in my life from about 13 to 26. He wasn't there when I was dating. And so now that we have this strong relationship, like, we go on daddy daughter dates. He holds the door for me, like, he surprises me with where we're going. Like, it is so fun. He gives me relationship advice. He is so I'm in a current relationship, and we are like on the road to being married, which is excited. And so he's played a huge role in that, in asking questions and building a relationship with the person that I'm dating. And he will be the one to give the blessing. And I remember being young thinking, my dad's never going to be at my wedding. Like, that is not going to happen, because I was so mad. Yeah. And so that's just a sample of the role that he's playing and the way that it's been restored. But he's also come to know the Lord as well, which has been incredible and has changed him in so many ways. It's not this outward change, but it's a heart change. And that is what matters the most, is we have to tame our hearts, right? And yeah, so it's been incredible, and I just hope that this gives hope to anyone else who has had estranged relationships with children or with their parents or with siblings. Like, there is healing, it is possible. And it does take two. Like, you do, I'm glad he wants to have a relationship. It is a two-way street, but I will say the biggest change was being humbled and realizing the ways in which I was wrong and receiving his love in the way that he gives it.
It's almost like that relationship, like you use the word restored. It has been restored. And that's really what God does, is he does that in so many areas that we feel like is lost. and he comes in and restores them. There's a book that it's been profound in my life, and it's actually not a Christian book. Some of the fundamental principles in this book are very Christian, I feel like, but it's called Letting Go. This book is all about like just kind of going through the flow of life and letting things go that are not really for you. The ability to be able to navigate through life and say, I'm just not going to hold tightly. I don't have expectations. I'm just going to live my life and I'm going to treat people well and I'm going to create boundaries of how I want people to treat me. And people will come into my life. And I believe this is also very Christian. I've meditated on this a lot. This idea of people coming into your life and being there for a season. And it doesn't make them a bad person when it's time to split paths. But it's just it's a life, you know. Sometimes God has us on a trajectory and he'll bring people into our lives for a certain time and a season, and then he moves them to create room for someone else that he has for you to get to that ultimate destiny. And it's a beautiful thing. And it just reminds me a lot of what you're saying, because that ability to let go when you need to let go, but then also leave your heart and your mind open for that restoration, because there's lots of healing in letting go of a relationship that you think is not going to be there. You're going to let it go, but then the restoration of that coming back into your life. And it's been profound and impactful in your own life. I hear in your talking, in the way you're talking about it. So for that, I'm very happy for you, and I think that there's probably no better person on the planet to do what you're doing, because I think you can resonate very well with the students that you work with. But with that being said, if someone's struggling, that maybe their child's struggling and they're wanting, they need something like this, how would they get in contact with you?
Yeah, so we have an online course, as I mentioned before. And if they visit our website, leonfe.org, they can find the course there. The other thing that I would recommend is to find humility and to form a relationship with Jesus Christ. And I know some people would be like, oh, no, religion's not for me. That's fine. But I will say that that is the one thing that has changed and healed everything. I I am not going to speak against therapy or counseling because it has done a lot for me over the years. But since coming to know the Lord, I don't need that anymore because I have answers to the things that I was struggling with. I know certainly how to get through these things. I have a powerful Lord who I can turn to in prayer, and he does give me the support and strength that I need to get through those things. So I will just put a plug in for having and forming that relationship because it ultimately does change everything. But in terms of other resources, there's a lot of great books out there. I do say that therapy and counseling can help. The other thing is if someone in particular wants mentorship for their students or wants other resources, they can contact us through the website. We've got lists of resources on there. We have a group of mentors that they can tap into. So really everything is going to be on that website, leonfe.org.
Awesome. And that will also be in the show notes. We'll be sure to put that in the show notes for anyone interested in getting in contact with you. And I just want to add, like, sometimes everybody's on their own journey. So, you know, sometimes if someone is completely resistant to any form of religion, or even, I mean, to be honest, we live in a day and age where people, even the name of Jesus is offensive. It is an offensive name to some. And, but I have seen in my walk with the Lord, like, I've seen people be so resistant to it. They go on their own journey and then they're led there. So, and I also just want to say that if someone's listening to this and they are struggling and you're against religion or whatever, go get the help that you need and find that modality that can help you in that area, because that might be part of your journey. And when you're ready and when your heart is ready, definitely exactly what Catherine said it's right on, because I can attest to that as well in my own life. that so much changed when I gave my heart to the Lord. And I was on the verge of suicide, like before I came to the Lord. And I was in a very, very critical place. And God turned it all around for me. So if he can do it for me, I know he can do it for you. If he can do it for Catherine, he can do it for you. So I think that's kind of like my final thoughts. But Catherine, do you have a final kind of thing you'd like to leave our audience with?
I'll just reaffirm what you said. I didn't come to the Lord just by saying, okay, that's what's going to happen today. I also was in a very dark spot as well. And that doesn't mean you need to go to a dark spot, but it means that he charts our path. He called me on the day that he called me, and it wasn't up to me. And why he chose at this time in my life versus when I'm 40 or 50 or versus when I was 10 or 20, I don't know. Right? So there is this sense of we do have to go through certain things before that happens, and he will call you, right? So it's okay if it's taking some time, if it hasn't happened yet, if you're not there yet, if you, as you were saying, Amber, need to go to other avenues and get other resources, all of that is okay. So I just want to reaffirm that. And if you do feel called in that direction, the thing that worked best for me is just being humble and recognizing how we need him to get through this life and accepting him into our hearts. And that changes everything. So I will leave listeners with that. And thank you so much for having me on your show.
It has been such a pleasure to talk to you, and such a breath of fresh air, just to hear your expertise and your wisdom on this. And I know I do believe we're in a culture right now where youth are struggling, and there is a huge lack of clarity. They don't have clarity moving forward, and it really burdens me a lot for our youth. I have children, so it burdens me for the world they're growing up in. And I just want to say thank you for everything that you're doing. It's much needed, and I'm very grateful for everything that you're doing and for just your voice coming on and sharing today. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Through the Trauma podcast. If you have found value in this episode or believe in the mission behind what we are doing, please subscribe so that you never miss any future episodes. Also, be sure to check out our transformation project at transformationthroughtraumaproject.com, where we help inspirational stories get heard on a larger scale through multiple platforms. If you know someone who can benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Until next time.